They told me loyalty would be rewarded. I believed it, until my career ended in a 6-minute conversation. It was a Tuesday in late September. I'd just finished a quarterly review when my assistant appeared in my doorway. "Mr. Calloway wants to see you." Now. No agenda. Just a summons. I wasn't worried. I'd spent 19 years at Ashford, built the operations division from scratch, saved the company during the 2008 recession. I'd earned my place. Andrew Calloway didn't stand when I entered. "We're bringing someone new into operations," he said. "Victoria Miles. I want you to mentor her." I'd met her once at the summer gala, laughing too loud, clinging to Andrew's arm, asking our CFO to explain Bitcoin. No experience. No credentials. Just access. "Strategic integration requires technical expertise," I said carefully. "Is she qualified?" His jaw tightened. "She's eager to learn. That's what matters." I knew what this was. "With respect," I said, "I can't train someone without a foundation. Putting her in this role undermines everything I've built." His eyes went cold. "So you're refusing?" "It's not a suggestion, is it? It's a directive." Silence stretched between us. I could have nodded and played along. Instead, I said the truth. "If this is about appearances, do it without me." He stood. "Clean out your desk. Security will escort you out within the hour." 19 years. Gone. Not for failing, but for refusing to pretend incompetence was competence. Back in my office, I packed mechanically. A coffee mug, a team photo, a leadership certificate. 30 minutes later, 2 guards walked me out the side exit. No goodbyes. No eye contact. If you're new here and enjoying these powerful stories, make sure to hit that subscribe button and stay tuned for more. Let me know in the comments what part of today's story touched you most. That night, I sat at my kitchen table staring at my laptop. Then my phone buzzed. "Scarlett, it's Diane from procurement. What they did was wrong." Then another. "You were the best leader I ever had." 17 messages by midnight. From people who couldn't speak up publicly but wanted me to know I hadn't been invisible. I read every one. And by dawn I knew, I wasn't broken. I was angry. And anger, when focused, becomes fuel. 6 months earlier, before Andrew Calloway decided my loyalty was disposable, I'd received a call from someone I hadn't spoken to in years. His name was Julian Hale. We'd worked together a decade ago on a failed merger that nearly destroyed both companies involved. But we'd salvaged it somehow through sheer will and 80-hour work weeks. We'd stayed in touch loosely after that. Occasional emails, annual holiday cards, the kind of professional relationship that exists in the margins. He called me on a Wednesday afternoon. I almost didn't answer. "Scarlett Pierce," he said when I picked up. "Still solving impossible problems for people who don't appreciate you?" I laughed despite myself. "Something like that." "I'm building something," he said. "And I need someone who actually knows what they're doing." He explained it over lunch the following week. A strategic consulting platform called Vanguard Solutions. The concept was elegant. Predictive analytics combined with human expertise to help mid-market companies make better operational decisions without the bloated overhead of traditional consulting firms. "Think of it as decision insurance," Julian said. "Companies pay for access to our platform and our team of specialists. We analyze their data, model scenarios, provide recommendations. No 6-month engagements. No junior consultants padding billable hours. Just results." "Sounds ambitious," I said carefully. "It is. That's why I need you." I'd hesitated. I was still employed at Ashford, still committed, still believing that my work mattered there. "I can't," I told him. "Not yet." He'd nodded, unsurprised. "When you're ready, call me." Now, sitting in my kitchen at 2 in the morning after being fired, I pulled up his contact information. "Julian," I typed. "Is the offer still open?" His response came 4 minutes later. "Always. When can you start?" I didn't tell anyone what I was doing. Not my former colleagues, not my family, not even the handful of industry contacts who reached out after word quietly spread that I'd left Ashford Industries. I met Julian at a co-working space in Brooklyn. The office was small, modern, full of startups and freelancers hunched over laptops. We claimed a conference room and got to work. "I need complete honesty," Julian said. "What's your risk tolerance here?" "Hi," I said without hesitation. I have 6 months of savings and nothing left to lose. Good. Because this isn't going to be easy. He wasn't wrong. For the first 8 weeks I worked 16-hour days. I helped Julian refine the platform's decision algorithms, drawing on nearly 2 decades of operational experience. I knew what questions executives actually needed answered versus what they thought they needed. I knew where systems broke down, where data became noise, where human judgment still outperformed automation. We built something lean and sharp. No fluff. No buzzwords. Just functionality. Our first client was a regional logistics company struggling with route optimization. They tried 3 different software solutions and all had failed. We solved it in 2 weeks and saved them $340,000 in the first quarter. Word spread quietly through industry networks. We took on 2 more clients, then 5, then 12. I stayed invisible. Julian was the public face of Vanguard Solutions. I was listed as a senior strategist under my middle name, Scarlett Hayes. No photos on the website. No LinkedIn presence. Just results delivered anonymously. I preferred it that way. This wasn't about fame. It was about building something that couldn't be taken from me. By month 6 we had 23 active clients and a waiting list. By month 9, we'd secured seed funding from an angel investor who'd worked with Julian years ago. By month 12, Vanguard Solutions had become one of the most quietly respected names in operational consulting. And Ashford Industries? I watched from a distance as they began to crumble. The first crack appeared 3 months after I left. A major vendor contract fell through due to missed compliance deadlines. It was a partnership I'd personally managed for 11 years. The failure cost Ashford $2.3 million and damaged their reputation with one of the industry's largest suppliers. Victoria Miles had been put in charge of maintaining that relationship. According to my sources still inside the company, she'd missed 3 critical renewal meetings and failed to submit updated documentation on time. Andrew issued a company-wide memo about process improvements and communication protocols. Translation: damage control. 1 month later, another problem. A warehouse logistics system I'd implemented years ago began malfunctioning. Instead of calling the original vendor, Victoria decided to hire a new firm to modernize the infrastructure. The transition was a disaster. Shipments were delayed. Inventory went missing. Clients started complaining. I heard about it through Elena, a former team member who'd quietly reached out after I left. We met for coffee in a neutral location, careful not to be seen together. It's chaos, she told me, stirring sugar into her espresso with shaking hands. Victoria doesn't understand the systems. She keeps making changes without consulting anyone who actually knows how things work. Yesterday, she reassigned the entire procurement workflow to a team that handles marketing. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Andrew won't listen, Elena continued. He defends every decision she makes. People are leaving, Scarlett. Good people. The ones who've been there for years. How many? I asked quietly. 17 in the last 4 months. And more are planning to quit after bonuses pay out. I thanked Elena for the information, paid for both coffees and left. That evening, Julian and I reviewed Ashford's public financial filings. Their quarterly revenue was down 11%. Client retention had dropped to 73%, well below industry standard. Employee turnover was spiking. They're bleeding, Julian said. Slowly but visibly. They'll try to fix it, I said. Andrew's too proud to let this continue. And when he does? I leaned back in my chair watching the city lights flicker beyond the window. When he does, we'll be ready. The call came on a Thursday morning at 9:47 a.m. Julian's phone rang during our weekly strategy meeting. He glanced at the screen, frowned, then looked at me. It's a general inquiry form, he said. From Ashford Industries. My pulse didn't quicken. I'd been expecting this for weeks. What are they asking for? I kept my voice neutral. Julian opened his laptop and pulled up the submission. They want to schedule a consultation. Operational efficiency assessment. High priority. Who submitted it? He scrolled down. Victoria Miles, Director of Strategic Operations. I smiled. Not from satisfaction. From inevitability. Set the meeting, I said. But not yet. Make them wait 2 weeks. Tell them we're backlogged. You sure? Completely. Making them wait wasn't about pettiness. It was about positioning. Desperation increases perceived value. If we jumped immediately, we looked hungry. If we made them wait, we looked essential. 2 weeks later, we confirmed the consultation. Virtual meeting. Julian would lead. I would observe, camera off, under my alias. The day of the meeting arrived. I dressed carefully that morning. Tailored blazer, understated jewelry, hair pulled back professionally. Not because anyone would see me, but because how you present yourself affects how you think. At 2 p.m. I logged into the video conference from our Brooklyn office. My camera was disabled. My name displayed as S. Hayes, Strategic Consultant. Julian's face appeared first, composed and professional. Then the Ashford team began joining. Andrew Calloway entered the call third. He looked older than I remembered. Thinner. There were shadows under his eyes that hadn't been there a year ago. Victoria joined last, smiling brightly, wearing a cream-colored blazer that probably cost more than our office rent. She looked confident, polished, completely unaware that she was drowning. "Thank you for making time," Andrew began. His voice was strained. "We've been experiencing some operational challenges lately, and we're looking for an outside perspective." Julian nodded. "We appreciate the opportunity. Can you walk me through the specific issues you're facing?" Andrew glanced at Victoria. She straightened, clearing her throat. "We've had some transition difficulties," she said carefully. "Our vendor compliance rates have dropped, and we're seeing delays in our logistics workflows. We think the issue is systemic, possibly related to outdated processes." I bit the inside of my cheek to keep from reacting. Outdated processes. The same processes that had run flawlessly for 15 years until she touched them. Julian asked follow-up questions, his tone neutral and professional. What systems were currently in use? When did the problems begin? What solutions had they attempted? Victoria answered most of them vaguely, using corporate jargon that meant nothing. Streamlining initiatives. Structural realignment. Optimization pivots. Andrew filled in the gaps when she faltered. He was clearly embarrassed, though he tried to hide it. After 30 minutes, Julian leaned back. "Based on what you've described, I think we can help. But I'll need full access to your operational data, vendor contracts, and internal workflow documentation." Andrew nodded immediately. "Whatever you need." "One more thing," Julian added smoothly. "For a project of this scope, I'll be bringing in one of our senior strategists. She specializes in procurement and supply chain architecture." "That's fine," Andrew said. "Who is it?" Julian smiled. "Scarlett Hayes. She'll be leading the on-site assessment." There was a pause. A flicker of confusion crossed Andrew's face. "Hayes," he repeated slowly. "That's correct. She's one of our most experienced consultants. I think you'll find her insights invaluable." Victoria glanced at Andrew, clearly not recognizing the name. Neither did he, apparently. My middle name had done its job. "Looking forward to working with her," Andrew said finally. The meeting ended 10 minutes later. When the screen went dark, Julian turned to me. "How do you feel?" I exhaled slowly. "Like I'm about to walk back into a building that tried to erase me." "You don't have to do this. I can send someone else." "No," I said firmly. "This is mine." The on-site assessment was scheduled for the following Monday. Julian and I spent the weekend preparing. I reviewed every document Ashford had sent over. Financial reports, workflow diagrams, vendor agreements, operational logs. It was immediately clear what had gone wrong. Victoria had dismantled systems she didn't understand, replacing them with generic templates she'd probably found online. She'd renegotiated vendor contracts without understanding the original terms, costing the company favorable rates and priority service. She'd reassigned responsibilities to teams without the proper training or resources. It was amateur work dressed up in corporate language. And it was killing the company. Monday morning arrived cold and gray. I dressed simply. Charcoal pantsuit, minimal jewelry, my hair pulled into a sleek bun. Professional armor. Julian offered to come with me. I declined. This was something I needed to do alone. The Ashford Industries building looked exactly the same. Same glass facade. Same revolving doors. Same marble lobby with the company logo etched into the wall behind the reception desk. But I wasn't the same woman who'd been escorted out a year ago. I signed in at the front desk. The receptionist, someone I didn't recognize, handed me a visitor badge without a second glance. "Fifth floor, conference room B," she said mechanically. I took the elevator up, watching the numbers climb. My reflection stared back at me from the polished steel doors. Controlled. Ready. When the doors opened, I stepped out into the hallway I'd once walked every single day. The carpet was the same. The artwork on the walls was the same. Even the faint smell of coffee and laser printers was the same. But I was no longer an employee. I was a consultant. An outsider. A problem solver they'd hired because they'd failed without me. Conference room B was at the end of the hall. I pushed open the door at exactly 9 a.m. Andrew Calloway sat at the head of the table. Victoria Miles sat to his right. 3 other executives I recognized filled the remaining seats. Every single person looked up when I entered. There was a moment, just one, where no one moved. Where the air seemed to solidify. Andrew's face went pale. His mouth opened slightly, then closed. Victoria blinked, confused, glancing between Andrew and me as if trying to solve a puzzle. I set my briefcase down on the table and smiled politely. "Good morning," I said, my voice steady and professional. "I'm Scarlett Hayes with Vanguard Solutions. Thank you for bringing us in." Andrew's eyes widened. Recognition finally clicked into place. "Scarlett," he said hoarsely. You're with Vanguard?" "I am," I replied simply. "Shall we begin?" The silence that followed my introduction was thick and suffocating. Andrew looked like he'd swallowed glass. Victoria's perfectly composed expression cracked at the edges, confusion giving way to something closer to alarm. I didn't give anyone time to recover. I opened my briefcase, pulled out a bound presentation and set copies in front of each person at the table. "Over the past week, my team has conducted a preliminary analysis of your operational workflows, vendor partnerships and supply chain architecture." I began, my tone even and clinical. "What we found is both fixable and urgent." I flipped to the first page of the report. A chart showing vendor compliance rates over the past 18 months. The decline was sharp and unmistakable, beginning almost exactly when I'd left. "Your vendor retention has dropped by 34% since last October," I said. 3 of your longest-standing partnerships have either terminated or declined to renew. The primary cause appears to be missed deadlines and communication breakdowns on your end. Victoria shifted in her seat. "We've been transitioning to new systems." "The systems you replaced were functioning optimally," I interrupted calmly. "The issue isn't the infrastructure. It's the implementation and oversight." I moved to the next slide. A workflow diagram showing the procurement process before and after Victoria's restructuring. "This is your original procurement chain," I said, pointing to the left side. "Efficient, redundant in the right places with clear accountability at each stage. This," I gestured to the right side, "is the current structure. Notice the bottlenecks, the lack of oversight, and the gaps where critical tasks simply aren't assigned to anyone." Andrew leaned forward, his jaw tight. "Why wasn't this identified internally?" "Because the person responsible for identifying it doesn't have the background to recognize the failure points," I said evenly. "No offense intended, it's simply a matter of experience." Victoria's face flushed. "I've been working with consultants. Generic consultants who don't understand your specific operational needs," I said. "Which is why you're here now, paying someone who does." The room went silent again. Andrew rubbed his temples, looking a decade older than he had 15 minutes ago. "What do you recommend?" he asked finally. I turned to the final section of the report. Full operational audit. 3-week on-site engagement. My team will assess every workflow, rebuild your vendor relationships, and implement a sustainable management structure. After that, we'll provide quarterly oversight for 6 months to ensure stability. And the cost. I slid a single sheet across the table. Andrew picked it up, scanned it, and didn't flinch. The number was significant but fair. More importantly, it was non-negotiable. "This includes full access to our platform, priority support, and direct consultation with me throughout the engagement," I added. "If you want someone cheaper, I can recommend other firms. But they won't fix this." "I will." Andrew looked at Victoria, then at the other executives. No one spoke. "I need to discuss this with my team," he said finally. "Of course. I'll need your decision by end of business Wednesday." After that, we'll need to move to other clients on our waiting list. I stood, collected my materials, and offered a professional nod. Thank you for your time. I walked out of the conference room without looking back, my heels clicking steadily against the tile floor. Behind me, I heard urgent whispers, but I didn't slow down. In the elevator, I finally allowed myself to breathe. My hands were steady. My pulse was calm. I just walked back into the room that had discarded me, and I'd done it on my terms. The response came Tuesday afternoon. Not Wednesday. Tuesday. An email from Andrew's executive assistant, formal and brief. Mr. Calloway would like to move forward with the engagement. Please send contract terms at your earliest convenience. I read it twice, then forwarded it to Julian. His response came immediately. They're desperate. Well done. I drafted the contract personally. Standard terms, standard clauses, but with one specific addition buried in Section 7. Decision-making authority on all operational changes would require approval from the lead consultant. Me, for the duration of the engagement. It was unusual. It was aggressive. And I knew Andrew would sign it anyway because he was out of options. He did. By Thursday morning, the contract was fully executed. The engagement began the following Monday. I arrived at 8 a.m. with a small team. 2 data analysts I'd hired specifically for this project and 1 operations coordinator who used to work at Ashford before Victoria's chaos drove her out. We were given a workspace on the 4th floor. An empty conference room with a whiteboard, a projector, and access to Ashford's internal systems. I spent the first 3 days in deep analysis. Pulling reports, interviewing department heads, mapping workflows, identifying every single failure point Victoria had introduced. The more I dug, the worse it looked. She'd made over 40 significant operational changes in 14 months. 40. Most of them unnecessary, many of them destructive. By Wednesday, I had a comprehensive picture. And it wasn't pretty. I scheduled a review meeting with Andrew and his leadership team for Thursday at 10 a.m. When I walked into the executive conference room, Andrew was already there along with Victoria and 4 senior directors. The tension was palpable. I connected my laptop to the projector and pulled up my findings. Let's be direct, I began. Ashford Industries is currently operating at 68% efficiency compared to industry benchmarks. 18 months ago you were at 91%. The decline correlates directly with structural changes made to your operations division. I clicked to the next slide. A timeline showing each of Victoria's changes alongside corresponding drops in performance metrics. Every red marker represents a process modification that resulted in measurable negative impact. As you can see, there are 43 of them. Victoria's face went white. Andrew stared at the screen, his expression unreadable. The good news, I continued, is that most of this is reversible. But it will require rolling back the majority of changes made over the past year and reinstating systems that were functioning effectively. You're saying we need to go backward? One of the directors asked. I'm saying you need to stop breaking things that weren't broken, I replied bluntly. Innovation for the sake of appearing modern isn't strategy. It's chaos. Andrew finally spoke. What's the timeline for recovery? 6 months for stabilization. 12 months for full recovery. But only if we start immediately and only if there are no further unsupervised changes. I looked directly at Victoria. She couldn't hold my gaze. I'll need full operational authority for the next 90 days, I said. No changes, no initiatives, no restructuring without my explicit approval. If that's not acceptable, I'll withdraw from the engagement today. Andrew didn't hesitate. You have it. Victoria's head snapped toward him. Andrew. It's decided, he said flatly. Scarlett, proceed with whatever you need. I nodded once. Then let's get to work. The next 90 days were brutal. I worked 12-hour days, sometimes longer, systematically dismantling Victoria's changes and rebuilding the operational framework I'd originally created. I reinstated vendor partnerships, personally calling contacts I'd worked with for years and apologizing for the disruptions. Most were willing to return once they understood competent leadership was back in place. I rebuilt the logistics workflows, reassigned responsibilities to people who actually understood them, and implemented new training protocols to prevent future degradation. I fired 2 consultants Victoria had hired who were billing exorbitant fees for useless advice. I also rehired 3 former employees who'd left during the chaos. People who knew the systems, who understood the culture, who could be trusted. Slowly, painfully, Ashford began to stabilize. By week 8, vendor compliance was back above 80%. By week 10, client satisfaction scores started climbing. By week 12, the company posted its first quarter of revenue growth in over a year. Andrew called me into his office on a Friday afternoon near the end of the engagement. "You saved us," he said simply. "I don't know what else to say." "You could say you should have listened the first time," I replied. My tone wasn't cruel, just factual. He flinched. "I made a mistake. A significant one." "You made several." "I know." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Would you consider coming back? Permanently? As Chief Operating Officer? Full equity package? Board seat? Whatever it takes." I'd been expecting the offer. I'd prepared my response weeks ago. "No," I said simply. "Scarlett. I'm not interested in rebuilding my career in a place that valued proximity over competence. You didn't just fire me, Andrew. You erased me. You handed my work to someone unqualified because she was sleeping with you, and then you watched your company collapse rather than admit you were wrong." His face reddened. "That's not fair." "It's completely fair. And more importantly, it's true." I stood, smoothing my jacket. "I'll finish the engagement as contracted. After that, Vanguard Solutions will provide quarterly consulting as needed. But I'm not coming back. I built something better." I walked out of his office for the second time in 2 years. This time, though, I was walking toward something instead of away from it. The final report was delivered on schedule. Comprehensive, detailed, with recommendations for sustained operational health and quarterly checkpoints. Julian and I presented it together in the main conference room with Andrew, Victoria, and the full executive team present. Victoria had been notably quiet throughout the engagement. She attended meetings but rarely spoke. I suspected Andrew had very clearly explained the situation to her in private. When the presentation ended, Andrew stood and extended his hand. "Thank you, Scarlett. Truly." I shook it professionally. "Just doing my job." As we packed up, Victoria approached me near the door. She looked smaller, somehow less polished. "Can I ask you something?" she said quietly. I waited. "Did you do this for revenge?" I considered the question. "No. I did this because I'm good at what I do and your company needed someone who actually knew how to fix what was broken. The fact that it happened to be me is just poetry." She nodded slowly, then walked away. Julian and I left Ashford Industries for the last time at 4:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. The same building I'd been escorted out of. The same doors. The same lobby. But I wasn't the same woman. In the parking lot, Julian turned to me. "So what now?" "Now," I said, "we take the 3 companies that reached out to us this week because they heard what we did here. And we build. That's it. That's everything." 6 months later, Vanguard Solutions had grown to 42 active clients and a team of 17 consultants. We'd moved into a proper office space in Manhattan, with glass walls and a view of the skyline. I was named partner officially. My full name, Scarlett Pierce, was now on the website, on our letterhead, in every contract we signed. I didn't hide anymore. I didn't need to. One Thursday evening, I was reviewing contracts when my assistant knocked on my door. "You have a visitor," she said. "She doesn't have an appointment, but she says it's important." "Who is it?" "Elena Cortez. She says she used to work with you." I smiled. "Send her in." Elena walked in looking nervous, holding a portfolio folder like a shield. "Scarlett, I'm sorry to just show up, but I left Ashford 2 weeks ago. And I heard you might be hiring." I gestured to the chair across from my desk. "Sit." She did, spilling out her story. How the environment had become toxic. How Victoria was still making poor decisions despite the improvements I'd implemented. How she couldn't stay in a place that didn't value real expertise. "I know I'm asking a lot," she said finally. "But I want to work somewhere that actually respects what I do. And I know you do." I'd already made my decision halfway through her explanation. "When can you start?" I asked. Her eyes widened. You're hiring me? You're good at your job, Elena. You always have been. I'd be stupid not to bring you on." She looked like she might cry. Thank you. Thank you so much." "Don't thank me yet. We work hard here. Long hours. High expectations. I know. That's exactly what I want. After she left, I sat in my office as the sun set beyond the windows, painting the city in shades of amber and gold. I thought about Andrew still running Ashford Industries but diminished somehow. I thought about Victoria, still playing a role she'd never been qualified for. I thought about all the people who'd quietly reached out, telling me they'd left or were planning to leave, because they'd finally realized competence mattered more than politics. I didn't feel vindicated. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt settled. I'd been discarded by a company I'd given 19 years to, replaced by someone who looked better in photographs than she did on spreadsheets, erased as if I'd never mattered. And in response, I'd built something they couldn't touch. Something they couldn't take away. Something that didn't need their validation to be valuable. I hadn't burned their empire. I just built a better one. The following year passed in a blur of growth and momentum. Vanguard Solutions expanded to 3 cities, took on 86 clients, and attracted attention from major industry publications. Julian and I were interviewed for a profile in Operations Quarterly. Forbes included us in their consultants to watch list. I gave exactly 2 interviews, both carefully controlled, both focused on the work rather than the backstory. I didn't mention Ashford Industries. I didn't mention Andrew Calloway. I didn't need to. The industry already knew. Word travels fast in professional circles, especially when it involves a dramatic fall from grace followed by a stunning reversal. Meanwhile, Ashford struggled. They'd stabilized after my intervention, but they never fully recovered. Their market position eroded gradually but steadily. Competitors who'd once viewed them as industry leaders now saw them as cautionary tales. Andrew stepped down as CEO 18 months after my engagement ended. The board cited strategic differences and new direction. Translation: they blamed him for the collapse everyone knew Victoria had caused. She left shortly after. No press release. No announcement. Just gone. I heard Victoria ended up in LA doing brand consulting. I hoped her clients fared better than Ashford did. But honestly, I barely thought about her. She wasn't the problem, she was a symptom. The real disease was a culture that prized proximity over competence, ego over results, and appearances over integrity. That culture cost Andrew his company Victoria any chance at real credibility, and Ashford a decade of hard-won excellence. It also gave me something priceless. Absolute clarity about my own worth. 2 years after being fired, I walked into the Huntington Hotel, not as a ghost of my past but as a keynote speaker at the Operations Leadership Summit. 300 leaders filled the room. My bio listed my credentials. 19 years in ops, co-founder of Vanguard Solutions, expert in supply chain architecture. It didn't mention I'd been escorted out of Ashford for refusing to train an unqualified CEO's girlfriend. Or that I'd rebuilt my career in a Brooklyn co-working space. Or that the company I'd just saved from collapse was the same one that tried to erase me. Some truths don't need stating. They live in the silence between the lines. On stage I spoke without notes. Transitions are inevitable, I began. But survival depends on whether the people steering change actually understand what they're changing and why. I showed how efficiency plummets when optics trump operations, when leadership is handed out like favors, when busy is mistaken for progress. I never said, Ashford. I didn't have to. The applause was standing. Afterward, offers poured in, partnerships, board seats. I declined them all. I didn't need validation. Then a woman approached. Catherine Frost, Ashford's new board member. What happened to you was unconscionable, she said. You deserved better. For the first time, someone in power admitted it. Not to recruit me, just to acknowledge the wrong. It wasn't closure. But it was confirmation. I hadn't imagined it. I hadn't been wrong to speak up. Back at the office, Julian grinned. How'd it go? Fine, I said. Got an apology from Ashford's board. Too little, too late. Maybe, I replied. But it's something. That night I opened an old file I'd saved after being fired. A raw list. What I lost. Job. Reputation. Stability. Identity. What I gained. Clarity. Freedom. Control. Proof I was never defined by their approval. I deleted it. I didn't need reminders anymore. 3 years later, a courier delivered a small box. Inside, The Ashford Excellence in Operations Leadership Award, dated 2018, the year they'd quietly cancelled it. A note from Andrew, "You earned it long before I took it." I placed it on my shelf, not as a trophy but as a quiet marker. Some victories arrive late and some battles are won just by staying visible. 5 years after everything changed, I moderated a panel on transformation. A young woman asked the question that once haunted me: how do you know when it's worth fighting, and when to walk away? You don't always know, I said. Sometimes you choose the only path you can live with, even if it costs you everything. Staying silent would have cost me more, my sense of who I am. I looked at the young woman who'd asked the question. I was fired for refusing to train someone unqualified. I lost my job, my stability, my reputation. But I gained absolute clarity about my worth. I stopped waiting for permission to lead. So yes, it cost me, but it also freed me. The woman who walked out of that building unemployed was stronger than the one who'd spent 19 years waiting to be appreciated. Applause followed, real, resonant. Afterward, a woman lingered. I was fired 6 months ago for pushing back on something I knew was wrong, she said. Was I mistaken? Did you believe it was wrong? Yes. Completely. Then you didn't make a mistake. You made a choice. And now you get to decide what comes next. She smiled. Thank you. Later that evening, Julian poked his head in. Catherine Frost from Ashford's board is on the line. I took the call. They want to offer you so, he said after. Full equity. Board seat. It was the same offer Andrew made years ago. I already have everything they're offering, I told Catherine. I built it myself, without politics, without permission. There was a pause. You're right, she said. I'd probably do the same. After I hung up, Julian grinned. So? I said no. Good. We've got proposals next week. I need you here. Where else would I be? 7 years after I was fired, Vanguard Solutions was acquired. In the news, the headlines, the history books. Julian and I turned down executive roles. Instead, we launched the Pierce Institute, a training ground for professionals who lead with integrity, not optics. On opening day, I stood before 40 students. This isn't about climbing ladders, I said. It's about building something that doesn't need one. Knowing your worth before anyone else names it. Refusing to be erased. 10 years to the day after Andrew told me to clean out my desk, a letter arrived from Ashford's new CEO, formal, apologetic, acknowledging my contributions and their failure to honor them. I read it, folded it, placed it in a drawer. Not because it didn't matter, but because I no longer needed it. That night, Julian texted, "Dinner? Celebrate 10 years since you got fired. Best worst thing that ever happened." I replied, "You're buying the wine." I looked around my office, at photos, awards, letters from people I'd helped shape. None of this would exist if I'd stayed silent that Tuesday. I didn't burn their empire, I built a better one. And by the time they finally apologized, I'd already won. Not by defeating them, but by becoming someone they could never diminish. The end.